Justin.
Hi.
Thank you so much for being here. So, one of the reasons why I wanted you on, not necessarily for your history and your life, which has been amazing, but is your energy. So have you always been someone who's just had this level of energy, or just this level of magnetism when you enter a room, when you interact with people?
Well, firstly, thanks for having me here today. It's very nice of you to say that. So I can't really put a finger on why, but I am naturally an enthusiastic person. I'm definitely someone that, I think it's probably because I've got quite an addictive nature. So when I get into something, I really get into it. And so from a work perspective, if I enjoy my work, I really enjoy my work. But to the extent where my customers would say to me, wow, you're very enthusiastic about what you talk about, or you talk about your business with such enthusiasm. And I don't do that deliberately. That's just me as a person, and it could be anything. It could be following my football team. I'm the same. It has its downsides. I think there's ups and downs to it, because I'm told often that when I'm up, I bring everybody up, but when I'm down, I bring everybody down too. So if there's been a bad football result for me, it can ruin 2 or 3. I'm fed up about it for 2 or 3 days. But on the flip, if the result's good, I'm euphoric for a week. So I don't really know why that is. It might stem back to the fact that I was quite ill when I was young. When I was a young man, I was ill. I didn't really fully understand the degree of how ill I was at the time. So my mindset was, well, the doctors are telling me that I'm ill, so therefore I'll have my treatment, and then after my treatment I'll be better. There's no question of there being another alternative. They've said I'm not well and I need treatment. I'll take the treatment. I'll get better. I'll carry on. So my mindset was, and then as I got older and I started to understand more the severity of what I was going through as a young man, I started to sort of create lots of short-term goals in my mind. So I felt like I always wanted something to look forward to in the next few weeks. And it wasn't a morbid approach. It wasn't because I might not be here after the next few weeks. It was just, I want something to look forward to in the coming weeks, and then when that milestone passed, I want something to look forward to in the next few. And so I was always, in my mind, I was always sort of looking forward to the next enjoyable thing, whatever it was, whether it was going on holiday, or whether it was going to a football match, or whether it was meeting up with friends, or, it didn't matter. Whether it was going out to buy myself something, or, or a treat of some kind, there was always something. And so I think what's happened is it sort of led me to be quite a positive, enthusiastic person. But yeah, I've been told that, and I'm glad that people do enjoy that about me. And at the same time, I'm conscious of the fact that, when I'm not feeling it, other people around me are, I bring those down too. So I've sort of, and in my mind, I'm like, oh, do you know what? Look, I should really try and turn this frown upside down, and try and pick people up around me as I go.
And so were your parents, were they kind of a similar level of energy?
Not really. In all honesty, I don't. I still contact with my mum. I don't have so much contact with my dad. I have no contact really with my dad nowadays. So my memories of my dad are more from up until the point at which I left home, really, and not long after I left home. And I don't think he was a particularly overt person. My mum especially is not. They're clever people.
What did they do as careers?
So my mum, when I was young, my mum was in accounting, and my dad was a builder by trade, and then he moved into, he was a manager of a plant hire company. And so, fairly sort of average middle class jobs. But you know, I always thought they were sort of, you know, intelligent people who sort of knew, you know, knew what they wanted. You know, they wanted the best for me. They put me through the 11 plus, which was the exams you took when you left primary school, which determined whether you had the intelligence levels to go to a grammar school or not. And they put me through that, and I passed the 11 plus, and I, you know, managed to get into a grammar school from a secondary school.
So you were quite smart then as a kid.
I think I've always been quite smart. I think I think the problem is as a kid I didn't really want to learn. I was bright, but I didn't really have the hunger to learn. That, you know, the young people who are really smart go out and get a really good education. Absolutely, and they'll benefit from that for the rest of their lives. I wasn't, although I know I'm smart, and you know, and as an adult now, you know, I think I'm savvy, I think I'm smart, I think I'm streetwise. You know, I can learn things very quickly, especially something that I'm passionate about. When I was in my school years, though, I didn't have the motivation. I was lazy, I was disruptive, I was cheeky, you know,
Sounds like a nightmare.
yeah, and in all honesty, although I sort of fell ill literally just as I left school, I still didn't leave school with much qualifications behind me. So I'd not put myself in the best position for a career path because I hadn't got very good exam results at school.
And why do you think that was?
I just didn't want to. I didn't want to learn. What I was doing, you know, when I talked about being enthusiastic about things I'm interested in, I wasn't interested. Weirdly, I found as an adult, I've become really interested in history, really interested in the history of the royal family and wars, and you know, it really fascinates me. At school, I didn't want to know, wasn't interested. Maths, I took an interest in maths. I think maths is probably the one subject I got a qualification in that I could use. But everything else, I wasn't, you know, I was very sporty, so I enjoyed sports, but I never took a path that would have, you know, made the most of my interest in sport or partaking in sport. So I just think I wasn't interested in learning. And look, on reflection, I still, as an adult now, understand why I felt the way I felt. I'm not saying it's right. You know, I've been lucky, I think, the way my career has evolved as I've grown into an adult has been a combination of luck, a combination of my personality type, and not the kind of things that I think you are taught at school. Now, you know, and you can't rely on that. You can't rely on that.
Well, I mean, before we started, you were saying something quite interesting about the career path that you were almost predetermined to go into. But before we talk about that, I'm interested to know. So you grew up in East London.
Yes.
Which part of East London was it?
Yeah. So I was born in Forest Gate, and we lived in Manor Park. Only till I was about 8 or 9, and then, as I said, my dad was a builder, and he'd been working on a site in Essex, and found a plot of land, and made the decision to build a home for us out in Essex, and moved us out of East London in the late 70s.
Why so far away? And why out of East London?
Yeah, well, I think probably his opinion, even in the late 70s, was that, you know, I think he made a decision that it wasn't a place that he wanted us to grow up as kids. I think we were young enough not to be involved in any, you know, I was only 9, my little brother would have been 6. So it's not that we were exposed to or involved in crime or affected by crime, but there was crime in the area, and I think my parents were thinking about bringing us up in an environment that was, in their view, a little bit more protective, a little bit more serene, you know, a little bit more calm. And he and I think where we ended up in Essex was purely because he happened to be working out that way, that far out, you know, because we were right out in the Dengie, you know. I even speak to people from Essex today that haven't heard of the village that that I lived in for 10 or 15 years, and I just think that they felt that if we moved out into the country, really is what it was. We were moving out from the city into the country. And I just think their reason for that was, probably to try and get out of the rat race, maybe, that kind of thing. But I was too young, by that time I was only really going to primary school anyway. And so I kind of didn't really know much different, to be honest. For me, in my mind, in my memory, as an adult now, in my memory as a child, my life only really sort of started by the time we were in Essex. I don't have that many memories of, what my life consisted of on a day-to-day basis all the time I lived in East London.
So how comes you still support West Ham then?
Yeah, well, that's something that through thick and thin that stuck really. The whole family were West Ham fans. So my dad, my granddad, my uncles, the whole family really. Even now I look on Facebook and all my, there's regular comments and posts from various members of my wider family on West Ham, and I think it's one of those things that, when you're brought up with that, you stick with it and you stick with it. And there's been times when I've been sick of being stuck with it. Quite pleased with it at the moment. We've had, it's been enjoyable, but it's been a big part of my life actually. Really, it's again, it's one of those things in my life that I love, and I've spent a lot of time and devotion to it. And I've got a lot out of it. Really, I've got a friend that I've now had for 25 years that I met through going to see West Ham. Literally met him on sitting on a coach to an away game, and I went on my own, and he was sitting in the seat in front of me, and clearly the guy next to me was friends with the guy who was sat next to him, and they were talking to each other around the side of the seats. And I said, look, if you want, you can sit next to your pal, and I'll sit next to that strange guy in front. That strange guy in front, still my friend 25 years later. I'm godfather to his youngest daughter, and he was best man at my wedding, and we've been friends ever since. So
Wow.
the West Ham thing, that'll never die.
Did you go to the final?
I did the Conference League final. No, I didn't. No, I went to some of the games in the build up to the final, and I went to some of the games the year before in the Europa League. And hopefully, if I'm lucky enough, I'll go to some in the Europa League this season. No, but I ended up watching it round a friend's who's a fan, and he kindly opened his house to a whole group of people that were there, and it was a good evening, a memorable night.
Yeah, a little bit of joy for a West Ham supporter.
Yeah.
So, what I'm actually quite interested in is, as we were saying before. So you turned 16. You didn't do so well in your, was it GCSEs?
That's that O levels.
O levels, okay,
yeah,
O levels. So just before. So and then you were kind of pegged for a career, but it didn't pan out that way.
Yeah. So as a teenager, me and my friends were sort of into cars and motorbikes and how they worked, and so back then, I think if you wanted to create an opportunity for yourself to get into a career, there was a scheme that existed called the YTS scheme, the Youth Training Scheme, and there was a YTS centre in Essex that had places, and myself and my two friends had secured ourselves a place at that, like college. And then along with that, we'd secured placements at places of work. So I'd secured a placement at a local garage to be a mechanic, as did another one of my friends, and then the third friend got himself a placement at an engineer's company, and that's what I had set up ready for when I left school. But as I explained earlier, I'd been in the last sort of 6 months of school during my exams, and it's not an excuse for my exam results were so poor. I mean, that was just a lack of revision and a lack of effort on my behalf. But during that period, I developed a painful lump on my left shin. And I was into all sorts of sports, running. I used to love running. I played football, cricket, rugby, everything. You know, if it was sport, I did it. But I had this lump form on my shin, and I'd been into hospital and had some biopsies on it around the time of my exams. And literally the day after my last exam, so my first day of leaving school, that was diagnosed as being cancer. And I was told that I had to go straight into St Bartholomew's Hospital in East London, in the city, the next day. So I took my last exam, I left school, and then the day after that I was in hospital. And then it wasn't a permanent stay, but I was in hospital, diagnosed as having a bone tumour in my left leg. They obviously started off by scanning me and my whole body, by which point they determined that the tumour had spread ever so slightly to both of my lungs as well. And then I really spent the next 2 years going through various types of treatment, radiotherapy, chemotherapy, to try to get rid of that tumour. You know, so I wasn't in hospital the whole time, but, excuse me, I was in and out of hospital a lot. I wasn't able to take up the YTS placement. I had to let them know I couldn't start. So I was technically unemployed, but sick, in and out of hospital. Yeah, and that went on for 2 years until eventually they made a decision that the chemotherapy they was giving me was the worst type they knew. And it got to the point where it was sort of stopped the tumour from getting any worse, but it wasn't making it any better. By which time my leg was so painful I could barely walk. I'd sort of already qualified for the badges, for orange badges in those days. They're blue badges nowadays, they were orange back then. Okay. I'd qualified for an orange badge. I couldn't really walk. My leg was you know, excruciatingly painful. I had to keep having the chemotherapy to stop the tumour from getting any worse. And they sort of gave me an option to, you know, look, do I want to stop the chemotherapy and have my leg amputated? And at the time, and even today, it was absolutely the right decision to make, but it was an easy decision. At the time, it was an easy decision to make. I couldn't wait to get rid of the leg. The leg was killing me, the chemotherapy was killing me. I just wanted to get on with my life. I was 17. In fact, my driving test came through on May the 25th, and they told me the amputation was going to be on the 1st of May. So never before would I have needed a driving licence more than, you know, having just lost my leg. So I'd had driving lessons up until that point in a manual car, but I was about to have my left leg amputated, so we didn't move the driving test. We kept the driving test. I had the amputation, had my left leg amputated. I was probably out of hospital after about 10 days. I'm sure that would be like 3 or 4 nowadays, but I was in hospital for just over a week. I had a couple of lessons in an automatic. So my mum and dad managed to secure me a car on Motability, which was a scheme that exists to provide vehicles for people with disabilities. Still exists today. Fantastic system that. Got me my first car. I had a nice brand new Mini for no cost to any of us. Had a couple of lessons in that and still took my driving test. So I literally still had the bandages on my stump when I took my driving test at the end of the month, so I had the amputation at the beginning of the month, and by the end of the month, I was the only one of our group of friends that had a car. And so I pretty much became everybody's taxi for the next 6 months.
So when you were first, when they first told you that you'd had an issue,
yeah,
what went through your mind?
That's very, very vivid in my mind. Very. So I was 15. Now, I don't condone this, kids. I smoked. Me and my mate smoked. When they told me I had cancer, the first thing, literally the first thing that went through my mind was, oh my God, now my parents are going to know I've been smoking. That was the first thing that went through my mind, because at 15, I associated cancer with smoking.
Okay.
So they told me I had cancer, ergo, my parents will know I've been smoking because I've got cancer. So that was the first thing that went through my mind. I do remember having conversations with my dad trying to explain to me that my hair would likely fall out when I started having chemotherapy. I didn't understand any of that. I didn't understand a lot of what was going on at the time. But I think my naivety is what got me through, because you know, I think I found out when I was about 20 that my parents were told when I was 17 that it didn't look likely that I would make 18. Because I never really understood why, when I got to 18, they laid on this massive birthday party for me, and I never understood why we was having such a big party. Oh, I know it was 18, you know, and people celebrate their 18th, but they really kind of went over the top. But my parents chose, you know, not to tell me that at the time, which again is, I think, absolutely the right thing to do, because my ignorance meant that I just had to have whatever treatment I had to have, and that's what happened. You didn't not get better. You were ill. You needed treatment. You had your treatment. You got better. So I was just expecting to take the treatment that I was due to have, and I would get better. So I didn't really understand it. You know, my parents sheltered me from, thankfully, sheltered me from, you know, the terrible side of it. You know, the fatal side of it, or the near fatal side of it. I think I probably fell out with them about something when I was 20, so they decided to tell me then, you know, make me feel bad, which it did. But yeah, so at the time, I never felt like I was in a life-threatening situation, because I just didn't understand I didn't really properly understand what was going on. Obviously, as I got older, and unfortunately, the cancer never stayed away. You know, as I got older, it reoccurred. So by the time it reoccurred for the first time, I was 5 years older. So I was probably in my early 20s. Then I was scared. Then I was scared, because when it reoccurred the first time, it came back in my lung, and I actually found out by the time I found that out, I was into water skiing. I'd met someone who said to me that they do water skiing for disabled people at a lake in Raisby in Staines,
Okay.
the British Disabled Water Ski Association. And as I loved anything sporty, this was a sport that I could partake in as an amputee. And I went down to the lake, and I met everybody there, and I started to get into the water skiing, and I was enjoying it. But I developed a cough, that wouldn't go. And it was just a nagging cough that just, you know, I was driving everybody mad, because everywhere I was going, I was coughing. So eventually I went to the doctors, and they just said to me, look, with your history, we should get an X-ray done. And I can remember it as clear as I'm sitting here now. I had the X-ray done. I was sitting at a dining table with my wife at the time, having our tea, and the phone rang. House phones in those days, house phone rang, and it was like 7 o'clock. And it was the doctor, and I thought, why is the doctor ringing me at home at 7 o'clock at night? And he said to me, you're looking at the X-rays, and I'm afraid to say there's shadows on your lungs, is what he said to me at the time. I'm going to have to refer you into Barts, and you'll have to go tomorrow. And it was, and you know, and I was older and wiser now, and I was frightened. I was properly frightened. So at the time, I phoned my best mate, and him and his wife came over. And this is typical. I was told to go and pick up the films. You know, because in those days,
Okay.
the X-rays would be big films like this in a sealed envelope, big sealed envelope. And I had to pick them up and take them with me to go to Barts again the next day. So I went and picked them up, and I remember my mate come round to try and make me feel better, feel comfortable, and he was sort of saying all the things he felt I needed to hear to sort of feel comfortable. And there was football on the telly, And I remember because obviously there's football on the telly, the screen was very green because of the football pitch. And I had an idea and I cut open the envelope with the films in and I took the films out and I've got the films up against the telly, the green of the telly, looking at the films, looking at these images of my lungs. And strangely, I could clearly see an egg-sized lump on my left lung. But as hard as I looked, with my lack of medical expertise, I couldn't see anything on the right lung. And so in a way, I kind of felt comfortable by the fact that I thought I could see what they were talking about on the X-ray on the left side, but not on the right. Anyway, I sealed the envelope back up. I took the films to the hospital the next day, and when we got into the room, the doctor put the films up on the proper screen that they use. And he said to me, "Yeah, look, I can clearly see there's a tumour in your left lung." He said, "But from what I can see, there's nothing on your right lung." And I thought to myself, I'd diagnosed myself. But they were, the hospital again were fantastic, and they weren't talking about doing any more chemotherapy, which I thought was a bit of a relief because the chemotherapy is probably the worst part of it. But they were going to have to take me in and operate and to remove the part of my lung. And as it happens, your left lung is naturally in two parts. They're called lobes, two lobes, and your right lung's in three parts, three lobes. And this tumour was settled neatly in the lower lobe of my left lung. And so all they did was they took me in for surgery, removed the lower lobe of my left lung with the tumour intact. And then all that happens is that the remainder of your lung then just expands to fill the cavity in your chest. So you end up with a slightly less dense lung, but not that I'd have ever noticed. I've even today, I wouldn't notice any difference. So that was that episode. But the main difference was, I was 5 years older, 5 years wiser, and that did make me scared. But we got over that.
And what's chemotherapy like?
Yeah.
For someone like you going through something like that, from an emotional and a physical perspective.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I can give quite a wide answer to that, in the sense that the chemotherapy that I started off with in the early 80s was horrible. But we're talking the early 80s, horrible. I would go into the hospital. They would put a little cannula in your wrist, little needle in your wrist, give you all the different chemotherapy, like big injections, a blue one, a red one, a green one, and they'd inject them in. You don't feel it because they're just going into the cannula. They inject them in and you go home. After getting home, for a day or so, you then start to feel sick, and then you're really sick. And what happens is with chemotherapy kills all fast-growing cells. Cancer is aggressive, fast-growing cells. Unfortunately, white blood cells and red blood cells are also fast-growing cells. So the chemotherapy kills the cancerous cells and your red cells and your white cells. And your white blood cells are your immune system. So the chemotherapy attacks your immune system. So there were periods when you're ill because the chemotherapy is making you feel sick, but then you get pneumonia because you've got no immune system. So then you have to get over the pneumonia, and then once you're over the pneumonia, they give you more chemotherapy. So that early period, horrible. The next time I had to have chemotherapy was when it reoccurred the second time, so the third time I had cancer, which was another 5 years after. And so now we're talking probably 10 years after I was originally diagnosed. And the process was completely different. And my experience was completely different. I would turn up at the hospital on a Friday night. They would sedate me. So I don't really remember much. They didn't put me asleep, but just sedate me. They give me lots and lots and lots of saline and then some drugs. And then lots and lots and lots of saline and then some more drugs. And then lots and lots and lots of... And this would last 48 hours, 72 hours.
So you were in hospital for
You're
that
in
entire
hospital
period?
2 or 3 days.
Okay.
Yeah, so I would go in on the Friday and come home on the Sunday. Wouldn't really remember much about Friday to Sunday because I was sedated. Don't remember feeling ill. Don't remember being sick. Do remember waking up on a Sunday, starving hungry, stop, please let's stop off at McDonald's on the way home and eat 3 burgers. Because I basically just laid in bed for 3 days, not eating anything. But I did, but the experience was nowhere near as horrific as 10 years beforehand. It was, and I could say to someone that had to go through that, all right, it's not nice, your hair will fall out. There are side effects, there are side effects that affect your body. You still have these periods when your immune system's low because it still affects that. But I don't remember being sick at all the second time at all. And that's really the worst part of it, feeling sick. And I just woke up hungry, whereas before I wouldn't have had any appetite to eat anything, and it's why people always look so ill, because your hair falls out, you're not eating anything, and you lose weight, and it's really quite debilitating. And then the last time I've experienced chemotherapy was more recently, a couple of years ago. I had bladder cancer. And I had a very, very small tumour on my bladder, strangely, completely unrelated to all the previous. I said to the urologist when he told me about bladder cancer, and I literally found out by accident. I literally had a dentist appointment, and I thought, before I go to the dentist, I must just go for a quick wee. And I went for a wee, and my wee looked like Ribena. I thought, that can't be right. So I phoned the doctors, and they said, look, you should get that looked into. Long story short, I had to have a cystoscopy, which is a camera into your bladder, and they said I had a very.
Did that hurt?
It's not an experience. In all honesty, no. But it's just not an experience that you think is in your mind. You're like, I do not want this camera going where this camera's going. But actually, if you just relax and you just let them get on with it, it's all done and over with, and it doesn't really hurt. It's just not pleasant experience. But I found out that I had a small bladder a small tumour on my bladder, and the good news for me was that this tumour was on the wall of the bladder, not through the wall of the bladder. So it was what's referred to as non-muscle invasive, which if you're going to get it, that's the kind you want to get. But it was about 1 centimetre in size. So they said, I've got to go in, have that removed under surgery, and then they'll test it. So I went in under general anaesthetic. I had that removed. That wasn't too. I was in and out in a day. I was in the morning, out in the evening. It was during the Euros, and I was asking them if they were going to let me out of hospital because England were playing Scotland, and they said to me, you can go, but you have to have weed 250 millilitres, before you. And you can imagine that was quite painful considering the surgery I had. But I was desperate to get out to see the football. Game ended up being a 0-0 boring game. But I was out. I got out. When they tested the tumour, most of the tumour was low risk. A little part of it was what they considered high risk. So they gave it an overall grading of moderate risk, which meant that they wanted me to have some chemotherapy. And I was thinking, oh no, chemotherapy again. So I said, well, what does this consist of? And they said, right, so what happens is every Monday for 6 weeks, go to the hospital, they insert a catheter, they through the catheter, they pour the chemotherapy into your bladder. Obviously, what goes in your bladder stays in your bladder until you wear out. Leave it in your bladder for an hour. After an hour, go to the toilet normally, and that's it. And I did that, and it was the easiest chemotherapy I've ever had. So I could honestly say to any man that said to me, I found out this is what I've got and this is what I've got to have done, really, really nothing to be worried about. It was, it wasn't painful. There were no side effects. The chemotherapy doesn't get around your body. It goes in your bladder, swirls around your bladder for an hour, comes out of your bladder. And so that was really quite straightforward. So really going from 1983 all the way up to 2020, what I can say and what I have seen and what I think most people would believe to be the case is that the medical efficiencies have improved so much over that time that everything's, I bumped into a guy once that turned out to have exactly the same tumour in his leg that I did. I was sitting next to him in a hospital department waiting for an X-ray. He was a man-mountain muscle bodybuilder, massive guy, had muscles bursting out of like every part of his body, but he just had this scar down from about his halfway up his calf to just above his knee on the inside of his leg. I got talking to him. He had exactly what I had 20 years before, but instead of having his leg amputated, he just had the bone removed and replaced. So he had a little bit of he had what's called an endoprosthesis. So he had the tumour removed, the bit of bone above it, and his knee. But his leg was completely intact. He was an HGV lorry driver, and that's 20 years of medical advances. You know, that was it didn't exist when I had mine, but 20 years later, someone with exactly the same diagnosis, and he, you know, just had some surgery on his leg, and from the outside, he looked completely normal.
So how did because it's been 5 times that you've been. Is it 5 times you've been diagnosed?
Yeah,
with
now.
cancer. How's that impacted your family or the people that you've been around?
Yeah, in a big way. I mean, I've actually, over the course of that 40-year period, I've been married 3 times, so it's affected all of those wives in one way or another. Yeah, you know, obviously, I think what my parents went through when I was initially diagnosed would have been the worst. Would have been the worst. They protected me from that. They took that knowledge on and kept it, you know, within themselves, and tried to, you know, act. You know, not that nothing was going on, but that, you know, things weren't as bad as they really were. So that was probably the toughest. But yeah, you know, the friends and family that have been around over the years, they're all affected, of course, but also a very important part of your convalescence and your survival, really. And you know, I found that it's important to keep your friends educated on what's going on. The more they understand, the better they feel, you know, because of course, if they don't understand what's going on, they can only think the worst, especially on the subject of cancer. You know, but I, you know, it's weird. I have a situation now where even my clients understand what's going on with me, you know, and as I mentioned before we started, I'm currently suspended on the kidney transplant list because of the cancer. So, but they've just decided that I'm now far enough clear of the cancer that they'll unsuspend me on the transplant list, which means I'll go active back on the kidney transplant list.
Let's get the because you've got issues with your
Kidneys, yeah. So again, probably a side effect of the early chemotherapy that I had in the 80s. What I eventually found out in the late 90s, that my kidneys were damaged. And my belief is my kidneys were damaged from the toxic chemotherapy without all the saline in the early 80s. So the second time I had chemotherapy, when they kept giving me all that saline over that 72-hour period, was because that keeps your kidneys flushed. You see? So they're giving you chemotherapy, but they're giving you fluid. And so you're constantly weeing, you're constantly keeping your kidneys clear. Well, that wasn't the case in 1983. In 1983, it was all drugs, no saline, go home and deal with it. Well, I think that probably led to, in the late 90s, I found out my kidneys were damaged. And what's happened is that over the sort of 25 years that's been going on, my kidney function is gradually, slowly reduced. It's currently at about 9 or 10% kidney function, which weirdly, I feel okay. You know, you can live with one kidney, so at 50% you wouldn't notice at all because you can live with one kidney. I've still got 2, but they're damaged, and my overall function's at about 9 or 10%. In reality, I don't feel too bad with it, but it's obviously not good. So I've been on the kidney transplant list, but because when you have a transplant, when you have a transplant of an organ, for the rest of your life, you have to take immune suppressants to prevent your body from rejecting the donated organ.
Okay.
And so that puts you at a slightly higher risk of cancer. So because I had the bladder cancer, they suspended me from the list. They keep you on the list, so you're still clocking up days, but you're not going to be getting a phone call because you're
Okay.
suspended on the list. But they've I'll be 3 years clear of that now. They've decided that, and it was non-muscle invasive. So they decided, because of the low degree of it and the 3 years clear, that the risk of it coming back now is minimal enough to put me back on the transplant list. So
Okay.
I've literally
Lovely.
just had a scan on Friday of the veins and arteries in my leg, ready for the plumbing of the new kidney. I haven't been given the results of that yet, but if that's all okay, I go on holiday next week, and when I come back from holiday, all being good, they'll put me active back on the list again. And they tell me that I've been on the list, because even you clock up the days even when you're suspended. I've been on the list so long that I should have clocked up enough credit on the list, suspended, that when I go live, hopefully I won't have to wait very long for a kidney. And that comes from a deceased donor. But even that's changed nowadays, because of course now the default is that you don't, unless you opt out of donating your organs, you donate your organs on death. So it's meant that there's more available. So thank you, for that. And hopefully I've got my fingers crossed and hoping that I'll get a kidney before Christmas.
That's good news. That's good news.
So I'm out in time for my next holiday.
To go back to talking about relationships,
Yeah.
something that I think that's quite interesting is that you share a lot of information about what you're dealing with friends.
Yeah.
And that often isn't the case, particularly with a lot of men.
Yeah.
And we don't find it very comfortable talking about some of the things we're going through. Partially, I think it's because it makes us feel vulnerable. And also sometimes because we don't quite know how people are going to react, and we don't want a certain type of sympathy. So
Yeah.
how have you managed to, why is it you feel so comfortable being able to share things and bringing people around you along the journey with you?
Yeah, it's a good question, because I think nowadays there is a lot more emphasis on, isn't there? You're right what you say about men not sharing. So I think nowadays there's more encouragement from men to share, and that's, I think that's a good thing, because as you quite rightly say, I've never had a problem with it. I've always been a wear my heart on the sleeve, share, overshare probably, but I've always been like that, and I don't, and I remember the very first time I met a customer whose office was 2 floors up. I turned up at his office, and he said, "Oh, let's make a cup of tea. My office is on the 2nd floor," and I'd only met him that day. And he flew off up the stairs with his cup of tea in his hand, and I was sort of hobbling up the stairs behind him, and he turned around and he said, "Come on, what's the matter with you?" I said, "Oh, I've only got one leg." He was devastated, he was devastated and apologised, and was like, "Look, there's no, I didn't tell you to make you feel bad. I didn't tell you because I want you to feel sorry for me. It's just, you'll understand why I'm taking 4 times as long as you to come up the stairs, that's all, And it sort of actually helped us bond, our relationship bonded that moment. He was a client of mine. Now he's a very good friend of mine. When I met him, he was a client. And, and over the years, he's become a friend. So I find that, I possibly do share a little bit too much. But what I find is that sharing that information actually helps you to talk about it. I think makes me feel better to talk about it. Actually makes you feel quite good about the fact that someone then turns around and says, "Wow, God, I can't believe you've been through that." And you kind of sort of reassure to yourself, "Yeah, you know what, I have been through that." And I don't say that consciously. I'm just thinking, from the outside looking in, I'm thinking, that's probably what it does. It probably does that. But also, I think it helps the other person feel more comfortable. But the more they know about I'm all about being real. In my roles are, it's a relationship role. The strength of my relationships is key to being successful in my role. And I can't stand people that aren't genuine. I hate that disingenuineness, if that's the phrase. I'm not saying that means everybody has to tell everybody everything about yourself, which I kind of do, but be real. If you don't agree, just say, and or if you want someone to know something, or you think they need to know, tell them. And I actually think that sharing that kind of information, it's how I had a client that knew that I'd been to that I'd been to see this faith healer I told you about earlier. He knew I'd been there because I told him about the cancer in my pelvis. And it was about 5 years later, and he was asking me about my kidneys because he knew, because I told him. So he was my client, and he said to me, "Oh, what's going on with your kidneys?" I said, "Oh, they think I'll probably need dialysis." He said to me, "Did you ever go back and see that faith healer again?" I said, "No, I didn't." He said, "Why?" I said, "Well, I don't know." He went, "You're an idiot." He said, "What are you doing Thursday?" I said, "Nothing." He went, "Right, take the day off. I'm coming with you. We're going to go and see him." And my client dragged me back to this faith healer that I'd seen a few years earlier, that had helped me with my pelvis. And the pair of us went. He went, "I'm going to go and I'm going to ask him about my sore shoulder. You can ask him about your kidneys." Now that would have only happened because he knew that about me because I told him, and so I in all honesty, I'm kind of proud of the fact that I've overcome these things in my life, and so for that reason, I'm proud to share them. I can't nowadays, as a 55-year-old man, I can't think of anything that could go wrong with me that I wouldn't want to share with my closest friends. But you are right. I think men do see it as a vulnerability, and actually, I think in reality it's the opposite. I think actually, you're stronger. You're a stronger person to talk about it, and so I think it is I think it's better to talk about those things.
No, I would agree wholeheartedly. When it comes to relationships with significant others,
Yeah.
do you think the experiences that you've had of being diagnosed and having to go through treatments, has it almost been almost kind of brought upon a siege mentality where it brings you closer together, or do you think it's had an impact where it's fractured some of those relationships?
No, definitely the former. Definitely brings you closer together. I'll give you the best example I can give you. My current wife, Lynn, we've been together 20 years. When I found out they were going to put me on the transplant list, Lynn insisted. I think I'd probably been with Lynn, I want to say maybe 10 years, maybe 15 years when she made this decision. She insisted on being tested for us to be a tissue match. So we went through the process. She wasn't a tissue match. She didn't want to leave it there because there's a system that exists. It's almost like a swap shop system. So I have a willing donor, my wife, but she's not a match for me. So you find a mirrored couple where the person that needs a kidney is a match for my donor, and his donor is a match for me. It might actually spread across 6, 8, 10 people. It's brilliant. The system works because if you receive a kidney or an organ from kidney probably more likely from a living donor. I'm not sure what else you can donate and still live, but if you receive a kidney from a living donor, the longevity of it is better than from a deceased donor. It's just the medical science of it. So therefore, it's better to get a kidney from a living donor than it is a deceased donor. So Lynn knew this, so she wanted to make sure that I got donated. So she wanted to make it. She went through everything that she had to go through to make herself available to donate one of her kidneys to a complete stranger so that I could receive a kidney from a complete stranger. Now, you know, that stemmed from her love for me, her commitment to me, you know. In reality, the situation is now that I think I've been on the list so long that I won't have to wait very long, that actually I've said to them, I don't want to have to put Lynn through that if I don't have to. If I get a kid, because the main reason for doing it was, one, getting a living donor instead of a deceased donor, but two, to make it happen quicker.
Okay.
Because when you've got a living donor and another willing living donor, you can go. Whereas when you're waiting for a deceased donor, you're literally waiting for the right person to die and come up with a kidney that matches you. So it takes longer. They're saying to me that I've been on the list so long, I'm so high up the list that I won't have to wait. I'm saying to them, well, on that basis, I don't want Lynn to have to go through that if she doesn't want to. But in answer to your question, you know, I can't think of a better example of my illness, or, you know, an illness bringing you closer to your significant other, than her wanting to donate one of her kidneys while she lives to make my life better.
Well, I've got a young person who actually I've worked with since the age of about 14, who's getting married tomorrow.
Okay.
And your relationship, the way you've spoken about your relationship with your wife, I mean, you've had 3 marriages.
Yes.
So you understand, you know, you understand your way around the, you know,
I'm getting
the
there.
system.
I'm getting
I was
there.
looking for the right word. So what advice would you give to him or to anyone else who's who wants to make a successful marriage, or who wants to make a marriage work successfully?
Yeah. Well, firstly, never, ever, ever take for granted what you have, and always, I mean, certainly make a habit. My wife and I, in one form or another, whether it's a text or whether it's just before she goes to bed or I go to sleep, always tell each other we love each other every day. Every day. And we're not my wife's not lovey-dovey. We're not a lovey-dovey couple, but every day, in one form or another, we will say to each other that we love each other. I don't think I could ever take for granted everything that she does for me, and you know what, she says the same to me. You know, we do different things. You know, she does things for me that I can't do for myself, and hopefully in return I do things for her that, you know, that give her, you know, the nicer things in life. So we never ever take that for granted. There's that. Never stop trying, I would say. You know, from my experience of having 2 failed marriages, I would say, you know, never. To me now, you know, obviously, you know, I'm in a relationship that I'm gonna make sure works until the day I die. But never stop trying. That probably falls into the don't take anything for granted category. You know, don't just assume that, you know, your wife knows how you feel about her because you're there. Tell her, you know. Always be there, always talk. Try not to go to bed on an argument. Or if you do, make sure you've made up by the morning, you know. Regular things like that for me, you know, that's what I would say. But I think it's important to make sure that your partner knows that you don't take anything for granted.
That's powerful advice. It's powerful advice.
Right.
I'm just trying to think about my marriage, and just I need to take some of that. So I wanted to move on slightly to something that you mentioned. You were talking about going to see a faith healer. So
Yes.
so are you? I wanted to know about I suppose the impact of spirituality or religion, or even just a form of logic in your management of all of these health risks, and all of the I suppose the trauma that you've been through.
Yeah. So firstly, I'm not particularly a religious person. I think there might have been, you know, the odd occasion over the years where I've prayed to God, but I'm not a religious person. I don't go to church. I'm not a complete atheist, but I'm just, you know, I'm probably not someone that wants to take religion, you know, deep into my heart, kind of thing. And fair play to those that do. I found myself in a situation where I was up, health-wise, I was really up against it. I was hours away from having an operation that would have changed my life completely. Would have put me in a wheelchair. Would have changed my quality of life. You know, literally. And I was at hospital that night having this conversation with the doctor, and my wife, my second wife, was there, and my mum was there, and then he was having this conversation with me about the impact of this surgery he was proposing to do the next day. But that he had to rethink it because he wasn't sure if it was the right thing to do, because he didn't want to ruin my quality of life and not even guarantee that he could cure the cancer. This was when it was in my pelvis. So he said he was going to send me home and have a rethink. So when he left the room, my mum happened to mention that my brother had been to a psychic fair local to where he lived in Essex, and he'd got talking to a faith healer. And I distinctly remember at the time I was highly cynical. You know, I was like, look, we're dealing with some of the best doctors in the world here. You know, and you're talking to me about a faith healer. And she was like, well, you know, look, he's got his card, you know, and at the time, I never really spoke to Sarah, my second wife, about how she felt about it or what she thought about it, but she was so desperate that that we had to try anything, and she desperately wanted me to pursue this course. You know, because I can only assume in her mind, you know, she had more belief in it, or even that she felt she was that desperate that she didn't care. Just try it, you know, what have you got to lose? And so she literally begged me to go and see this faith healer. So we did. And went and met this old chap who lived in Leigh-on-Sea in Essex, and he lived with his mum. And his story was that he'd almost died in a car accident when he was young. When he was 6 or 7 years old, he got hit by a car. He was very badly injured and should have died. But he said at the time he was visited by spirits who told him that he had a higher purpose in life, and that would be to heal people, and that he wasn't going to die because he had to stay on earth and heal people. And so he decided at that young age that was what, you know, that was it for him. And he must have been in his 70s when I met him. And because I was cynical, I'm keeping all my cards close to my chest. You know, I'm not giving this guy anything. And he asked if he could examine me, and by that I was dressed. He didn't undress. I didn't have to undress or anything, but he asked if he could just put his hands on me, and he did. And he put his hands on, you know, most parts of my body. And when he got to my hip, my right hip, where the tumour was, he said, "This is where the heat is emanating from. This is the problem area." I couldn't lie to him, so yes, it was. And so he said, okay. And then he talked to me about the ability to heal oneself, and, you know, he talked about aligning auras, and you know, and it was very much about understanding, you know, how the body is, helping you understand how the body is capable of healing itself. Anyway, he did his thing, and he put his hands on he put his hands on my hip, and I do remember there being a great deal of heat coming from his hands, and you know, and he gave me a crystal, sent me home with a crystal, and just said to me, you know, just rub the crystal every day, just rub the crystal, think about your auras and align them in your mind, and, you know, and that's the advice he gave me, and I took it, and I did what he said. And anyway, I went back to see the surgeon about 3 months after that, and they wanted to carry out a biopsy of my pelvis, like a big biopsy. They put me asleep to do it, and they took biopsies from the front of my pelvis to the back, from the top to the bottom. And Sarah and I went to see him. This would have been 1996, and he sat me down and he just had this bemused look on his face, and I said, he said, what is there something wrong? And he said, no, completely the opposite. He said, I'm not really sure how to tell you this. He said, but we've biopsied your pelvis and there's no tumour there. There's no tumour left. It's gone. And I was like, right, okay, so what does that mean? He said, well, nothing really. Just go away, carry on with your life, and we'll repeat it in 3 months' time and see if the situation's changed. Repeated it in 3 months' time, no change. Another 3 months after that, 6 months after that, and that was it. Never came back. So, you know, I would tell people the story, and oh, do you think it was a faith healer? You know, well, I don't know. I'm not going to tell the doctor this, you know. Oh, if you're wondering what happened, it's because I went to see this old fella in Leon C, and he put his hands on me and got rid of all the tumour for me. But in my mind, I was thinking, what, you know, wow, it could have been. It really could have been.
Where's the crystal? You still got the crystal?
Do you know what? I haven't. I did have it for years. I definitely remember having it the last time I moved house. Somehow between the last move and now, I don't know where it's gone. But I did have it certainly up until up until the last couple of years. Yeah, that's a good question. That, yeah, I thought about that. But then so the piece to the resistance of the story was. I mentioned earlier that one of my clients, he said to me, oh, you know, you've been back to see the faith healer. No, I hadn't. He said, well, why not, you idiot? You know, let's go. I've got a poor shoulder. Let's go. And we went to see the old chap again. And you know, and he remembered me. This must have been 5, 6 years later. Yeah, it must have been about 5 or 6 years later. Again, he put his hands on me. This time he stopped on my back and he said, you know, this is the problem area. Yeah, you're right. He did all the same thing. Now, my situation was, at that time, I'd found out that my kidneys were damaged. It was 1990. Oh, no, it must have been a year or so later. It was about 1997. And they'd said to me that probably, based on the way my kidney function was going, by the time I got to the year 2000, my kidneys will fail and I will need dialysis. That was the year 2000. It's 2023 now, and I still haven't. I say my kidneys are just hanging in there, but I haven't needed any. My function has literally clung on for 25 more years. And although I am on the kidney transplant list, I still haven't had any dialysis ever. So, you know, now it puts me in a situation where I would be a complete hypocrite if I turned around and said, 100% it had nothing to do with it. I honestly don't know. Part of me believes and has to believe that it made a difference. It did make a difference. I've still got that sort of cynical side of me that says, you know, what are you talking about? How could it? But, you know, it has. So, you know, I would say to anyone who's considering it, if you're considering it, do it. If you're not considering it, consider it. Got nothing to lose. Maybe a bit of pride. You might feel like, oh, you know, who cares? A bit of pride. Who cares about that? You might feel stupid going to see someone. This guy I went to see didn't want any money, by the way. He didn't charge for it. It wasn't someone that... I imagine there's probably a few charlatans out there that are trying to make money out of doing it. I'm sure there are. If you find the right guy, you know, you do your research, you find this guy didn't want any... I asked him if he wanted money. He just said to me, if you feel like making a donation to a charity of your own choosing, then do that. But he didn't want to take any money off me. Wow. So he wasn't doing what he did for money. He's doing it because he believed that was his, you know, he believed that was his role in life. I spoke to him about that, you know, as well. You know, why all these things happening to me? And he said that to me. He said, you might think, why me? And that, you know, it's bad that all these things are happening to you. He said, but you have to think about the positive effect that you have on other people. And, you know, it's kind of what prompted me to write the book, really. He said, you know, you have a purpose, and your purpose is to inspire people. And you have inspired people, and you will go on to inspire people. And that's why these things are happening to you, and that's why you're still here, because that's your purpose. You know, and I took that on board. You know, I'm all right with that. I'm comfortable with that. You know, I can nurture that. You know, it's not. You know, as I said, you know, when I wrote the book, all I really wanted to get out of writing the book was to just have someone turn around and say to me, "Your story has inspired me. I'm going to beat this thing, and you know, I'm going to go on and do everything I wanted to ever do, and I'm not going to let cancer beat me."
Well, that is a perfect segue onto 3 other areas that I wanted to touch on, which is what you've done in spite of all these challenges. So firstly, the sports and being active.
Yeah.
How did you, because you've cycled all over the world, which is pretty amazing. You were saying that you were interested in water sports before that.
Yeah.
What gave you, I mean, you were always sporty, obviously.
Yeah.
But how did you, as soon as you'd had your leg amputated, did you begin to think about things that you could do afterwards, or did it take a while to build up that, almost that confidence, that sense of belief?
Yeah, so little bits of everything actually. I distinctly remember thinking quite soon after I'd lost my leg that I had to do something that that proved I was still a man. So I jumped out of an airplane for charity. So that you know, that was something, that was probably the first thing I did. I'm not saying
How
that
high was it? Do you know how high it was?
at 10,000 feet.
10,000 feet,
Yeah,
okay.
I'm not saying that was the most enjoyable experience of my life. It was a bit terrifying, but I'm glad it's sort of on my CV. I'm glad to say I did it. Whether I'd be brave enough to ever do it again, possibly not. But at the time, I felt like I had to prove that. Little bits then came really through. What was really helpful was I obviously, especially in the early years, spent a lot of time at the limb fitting centre. When I was young, I would break my legs frequently. Right, I was so active. You know, I walk well. I think I walk well as an amputee, and I walked, and I was doing a lot. I was regularly breaking something on my leg. And so I spent a lot of time at the limb fitting centre. And at the limb fitting centre, there was always little posters in the waiting rooms about the British Disabled Water Ski Association or Limb Power. Now, Limb Power is a charity that gets recent amputees back into sport. Right, a lady. It's a charity run by a lady called Kira Roche, and I saw this poster. I met Kira. As it happened, she didn't live that far from where I live, and she operated an event every year at Stoke Mandeville called the Amputee Games. And as an amputee who liked sport, you could go there, and they literally someone there doing, whether it was amputee football, swimming, basketball, wheelchair basketball, archery, running, weightlifting, shot put, javelin, cycling. There was someone there.
Almost
You could
everything.
try anything. Yeah. You could go there and try. And you know, I never. You know, it's not like I became a Paralympian as a result of it. But some people that go there do. Some people that go to those events go on to become Paralympians. You know, I've met people that went on to win medals at the Paralympics that started off at Limb Power's Amputee Games. So that was good for me because, you know, it was all about trying to do something that you know, that made you feel, that kind of makes you feel normal again. Really, I know that's you know. Not that you're not normal, but obviously, you know, you're not. I used to love, you know, running. Running's probably the thing I miss the most because I can't run. You can get there. There are ways and means, but it's really, really hard. So my biggest hat off to any above knee amputee who runs, because that is hard. Cycling was something that I didn't realise I could do until about 15 years after I lost my leg. Got talking to a guy who said to me, "Oh, I'm sure you can still ride a bike." And I didn't know if I could. So I literally went straight from the limb fitting centre to Halfords, bought myself a bike, set myself up, leaning on my car, standing there trying to work out how to get going, how to get moving. And, you know, and after plucking up the courage to push myself off from my car and start pedalling, I realised I could ride a bike. And as you said, I went on to do 3 big charity bike rides. I did 500 kilometres in Kerala.
500
in
kilometres. How long
South
was
India,
that?
over 5 days.
5 days?
Kilometres over 5 days.
So you did 100
yeah,
kilometres a
average
day?
of 100 a day, yeah, kilometres a day. And then I did
In the heat as well?
yeah, it was. We had one day when there was a tropical storm. But yeah, I was younger and fitter then. That was, this was probably 15 years ago. Then following year I did one in Cuba, about 450 kilometres from the Bay of Pigs to Havana. And then, so that was all for a different charity. That was for a charity that was associated to the company I worked for at the time. And then eventually, Kira for Limb Power organised a cycling event from London to Paris, where myself and some other amputees, we all spent Friday to Sunday cycling from Bexley Heath to Paris. That was really hard, but really, really fulfilling. Really enjoyable. And we raised a lot of money. But I hung my cleats up after that one because
How comes?
Well,
Because how long's it been since you last cycled?
Well, I mean, I've cycled on an electric bike sort of around the village within the last couple of years, but I've given up on the cycling now. I mean, I would do it socially, but I wouldn't do it competitively like that because by the time I'd got to Paris, I'd sort of damaged myself sort of quite bad, so much so that I couldn't even get my false leg. I took my false leg off at the end of the bike ride, and where I damaged my abductor tendon, it was like swollen up like a golf ball. I couldn't get my false leg on for about 2 days. Okay. So I decided I didn't want to do any more long distance. It was a great achievement, and I took a great deal of satisfaction out of it, and we raised a lot of money. But I didn't feel like I have to do that anymore. So
So do you do an exercise at the moment at all?
Yeah, well now I actually yes. I joined a local fitness club, and they're local to where I live. My wife and I both go now, and we do an hour of boxing on a Wednesday, and on a Monday and a Friday I do what they call strength classes, where I'm basically working with weights. And the great thing about the place where I go is they're an hour-long class where there's gym instructors there to help you, and my club, they're so good that it might be a day where everyone else is doing squats, back squats, which I can't do. So they'll find something that I might then do overhead press instead. Or it might be that they're doing deadlifts. So instead of doing deadlifts, I'll do bench press. So yeah, I go, my aim is to try and go 3 times a week to do that. And that keeps me going.
And you've led a really active career. One of the reasons how we were connected was because of your career in finance.
Yeah.
So how did you get into that? Because I mean, you would be a car mechanic if it wasn't
for this. Yeah, completely.
This. And so how did you find yourself into finance?
Yeah. So it's sort of quite. I think with a lot of people in finance, it does happen by accident. Some people should go out of their way to go for it. For me, it was by accident. So I was due to be a mechanic, as we said earlier, and that never happened. So when I eventually got well enough to start work, my friends were sort of all looking around trying to find me work. And one of my friends worked at a local estate agent's, and he was quite well established in the company, so he got me in for an interview. And they didn't have a role there for me to be a negotiator, an estate agent, but their mortgage advisor needed an assistant. So I got this job as a trainee mortgage consultant. So, and that was literally on the basis of the fact that the guy who was employing was ginger. I was ginger back then. He was like, us gingers have got to stick together. Can you make a decent cup of tea? Yeah. And then there I was in this role as trainee mortgage advisor. I as I said, I've always been. I've always been quite sharp. I took to it really well. I've always enjoyed talking to people. That was a big part of the role. So I did quite well at it. And then I suppose I was doing that for about 3 or 4 years. And then I eventually got my own office. I was in my own office. And one day this guy come walking through the door of my office. Big tall guy in a suit. And he reached out his hand to shake my hand. And he said to me, "Hi, I'm Steve Painter. I'm a headhunter." And I didn't really know what that meant. I was like, right, okay, and what? And he said, and what had happened was his niece worked for a company that I dealt with, and you know, I only used to talk to her on the phone, and she'd told him about me. And it turned out his office was above mine, so he just came through the door and introduced himself. And he said, "Look, what I do is I recruit for insurance companies." And you know, he said, "You know all these reps that come and see you in their company cars and they take you out for lunch." He said, "How'd you fancy doing that instead?" I was like, yeah, company car, yeah, lunch, you know, take people out to lunch. Fantastic. So he set me up an interview, and I had this interview, and it went well, and they offered me the job. And then I did that job for a couple of years, and then I thought I fancied a change. I'll give this guy Steve a call. And he's like, "Yeah, no problem. I've got another role I can put you into." And he put me in touch with another company, and so now, you know, so now I'm sort of employed on fairly good salaries, but I've got company car, so I haven't had to worry about paying for a car and expense accounts, and you know, and I'm living the life really. I'm starting to enjoy that. Then eventually got myself a job. So I was talking with some pals at the company where I was working, and they were going, "Oh, you know what? If you go to Allied Dunbar, they give you BMWs as company cars." I'm like,
With you,
really?
it's about the company cars, isn't
Yeah.
it?
Oh, yeah. It's all about the company car. You get a BMW. Wow, BMW. I love a BMW. So they said, "Yeah, look, this manager of this office in Watford, it's a lady there called Jo Ranger." So I did a bit of research. I found out the name of her secretary, and I just phoned up her secretary, and I said, "Look, you don't know me, but can I come and meet Jo for a job?" And she went, "Oh, I don't know if we've got any jobs at the moment." I said, "Well, can I just come and meet Jo?" So in the end, I pestered this poor girl so much that she agreed, and I went and met this manager, Jo, and we got on really well. And she said, "Look, I'll find something for you here. I'll find you a job. We'll get you a job." And I was like, "Excellent." Turned out my first car ended up being a Honda Prelude, not a BMW, but it was still a nice looking car. Eventually I eventually got the BMW, but I ended up working there for nearly 20 years. And, you know, and I mean, more than anything, those 20 years served me really well. I was ill in the early stages, and it's when it was in my pelvis during that period. And Jo, my manager, looked after all my accounts for me. And in those days, working for that company, if you did well in the year, you basically won this sort of company holiday. You and your partner could go on this holiday with the company, all paid for by the company. And in this year, I fell ill and I was off work with fighting this tumour in my pelvis. Jo, my manager, basically looked after all my accounts for me and got me qualified for this holiday. You know, so it was a real good time. You know, and I met some fantastic people that I'm still friends with today, and gave me a great deal of experience in areas. You know, I suddenly started learning about pensions and life assurance and critical illness, and you know, you imagine someone like me that had beaten cancer 3 times selling critical illness cover. It was easy, you know, it was easy, and so I was enjoying that, and then eventually, again, by chance, I was told I was at risk of redundancy. I'd been there 20 years, and more than anything, those 20 years built me up a fantastic pension. I mean, I'm old enough to take it, but I'm still working, so I won't. But I've got this pension sitting in the background that primarily came from my 20 years with that company, with a job where I just introduced myself to the manager. That pension pot will suit me perfectly fine, right? And that all came from that. So I've got that to thank for that. But I was at risk of redundancy, and I didn't know whether I was going to be made redundant or not. And a guy that I worked with at that company had gone on to work somewhere else. And he said, part of the company that I'm working for at the moment, they're looking for someone. They're a company called Dragonfly. And I said, I've never heard of them. what do they do? And he went, oh, I don't know. He said, it's something to do with mortgages. Well, they're a bridging lender, right? And I knew nothing. I thought a bridge was how you got from one side of the river to the other. All I knew about mortgages was the fact that I had one. I hadn't sold mortgages for 20 years. And I went, yeah, look, I'll meet them. And I met the founder of Dragonfly and the managing director, Jonathan Samuels and Mark Posniak. And we got on like a house on fire. And they were like, look, we'd love to have you here, And I didn't know anything about the industry at all. I knew I would pick it up because, as I said, I've always been clever enough to work things out. And all they were thinking was my transferable skills, so my people relationship skills. I had good accounts, I had good relationships with people, and I think that's what they thought would be transferable. And that's exactly what happened. So that's how I got into the property finance industry. So really by luck, but 2 or 3 years in, I just kept saying to myself, oh my God, I wish I'd found this, because now things were going at a different level. Now I was earning more money than I'd ever earned before. Work was different every day. I couldn't wait to get to work on Monday. I was like 40s, and I couldn't wait to get to work on Monday. And I was just thinking, oh God, I wish I'd found this industry earlier. And I loved it. I went on. In our industry. There's an awards. It's operated every year by Bridging and Commercial, and it's probably the biggest awards event in the arena that we're involved in. And it probably took me 4 years. But eventually I won the BDM of the year. I won. So there I was being lauded as the best BDM in the industry. Which was so, that night at I had recruitment people coming up to me, and I was like, no, you're, and I swear, although I've moved one company from then to now, that's only because the founder started a new company and I went with him. So I'm still working for Jonathan Samuels, the guy who recruited me back at Dragonfly 11 years ago. So all the time I've been in the industry, I've been with the same people. And my mindset is simply, I will not go anywhere else. The way they've looked after me, the way what they've given me in my life now, what the introduction to this industry and the people that I've met and the things that I've achieved, and they're just, people email me and I'm like, you're just wasting your time, mate. I'm here until I'm not working, and when I'm not working, I'm retiring, and that's it. I do not want to go anywhere else. And I would love to be saying to people now, find a way into this industry, because I've never known an industry that is. When I first started, I was getting all these inquiries, and I wanted to say yes to everything. It was in my nature. I wanted to say yes. You can't, right? You can't. There's inquiries that come your way, and they don't fit, or it's not right, or it's not what you do. But I quickly learned that there are so many inquiries, and that the brokers introducing these inquiries to you have got so many options that if you give a polite no nice and quickly, you're doing a good job. If you can't do it and you politely decline and explain the reasons why, your clients are over the moon because they could just move on to the next option. And as long as you deliver what you say you will do, and for me, I would say the biggest thing about my success in this role is people know they can rely on me to do what they need me to do. And I'm a bit of a control freak, so I'm sort of all over everything really until it's done, because that's just in my nature. And again, we come back to the enthusiasm, because I love it so much. I can't help but be enthusiastic about it. And people meet me, and hear about it. And I've got to the stage now, 11 years in, I don't have to really go and see people and go, this is what we do, this is what we charge, this is what we do. They don't care. They're like, this is what I need. Can you give me that? Yeah, great, do it.
Very true.
Yeah. And
So explain to some of our younger audience exactly what it is that you do on a daily basis.
Yeah, okay. So my role is called Business Development Manager. Basically, what it is that so I work for a lender. So we lend, we're a principal lender, we lend our own money. I work for that lender. So therefore, we want to lend people money. We want to lend as many people as we can money, but we can't lend everybody money because not everybody wants what we do, right? But that's what we do. In this market, there are thousands and thousands and thousands of finance brokers, differing degrees. Some who focus on what's called regulated business, so they're providing mortgages for people's homes. But the even bigger market is a commercial market. So there are, as you will appreciate, there are property developers, property investors, people that want to get into property, people that are in property. And those people, it's in their interests to work alongside a broker, because a broker's job is to look at the market and decide which lender best suits that property investor's needs. So it's my job to call on the broker and convince them that it's Octane that are the best company for your client's needs. So you're looking for a company to provide you with a refurbishment loan. You should use Octane because of this, this and this. And not only that, I'll make sure this happens and that happens. And then ultimately, the property investor says, that was a really good experience dealing with Octane because they were really good. They did exactly what they said they would do. They helped me buy the property. They helped me fund the conversion into this HMO. And I'm delighted and I can't wait until I move on to my next project. And it's my job to go and see the brokers, to encourage the brokers to introduce their property investor clients' needs to us so that we can lend them money. And Octane's existed now for 6 and a bit years, and we've lent well over £1.5 billion in 6 years. I'm delighted to say that I'm probably responsible for 400 million of that, you know, and I love it. I just love it. Every day is different.
What is it you love about the job then? What is it that gives you that level of excitement that you feel?
So you still get a little bit of so because I'm in sales, I'm driven, you know, I'm driven by targets. I've got targets. Hitting targets means earning bonus, you know. So I'm still driven by the desire to earn money, to go and do nice things, you know, go on holiday and things like that. So I'm driven by that. But the role in itself is I'm dealing with great people that whose company I enjoy, and hopefully they enjoy mine. Every day is different. Every deal is different. Every deal that you look at will have its own challenges, you know, in one way or another. Whether it's a developer exit or a refurbishment loan or a bridge to sell a property, and it's the variety, and it's the fact that you know that if you get an inquiry and it's not something you can do, it's only 10 minutes until the next inquiry comes along. And that probably is something that you can do. So you haven't got to scrape and scratch around looking for business. There's lots of it's a big industry. Excuse me. There's lots of business going on in that industry, and you know, and to be part of it is a real buzz. It really is. And so to secure a deal is a nice buzz. So if someone says, I want to borrow £1 million, that's a nice buzz. But then the buzz doesn't end there. You've got to get that inquiry through to completion and get that £1 million paid out. And once that £1 million paid out, that's another buzz. You know, you've got a buzz, and then, and then that leads on to the next deal. And then probably one of the most rewarding parts of the role is having people that you've lent to come back a second and third and fourth and fifth time, because that tells you you're doing a good job. We can take great pride in the fact that we've got multiple borrowers that have borrowed from us multiple times.
Wow.
And that says you're doing. If someone borrows from you once and you never hear from them again, you're like, well, what? Why? What did we do to win the deal that we're not doing now that meant we haven't won the second or the third deal or the fourth deal? You know, what's the reason? And you have to look into that and try and understand why. So the rewarding part is someone borrows money, pay you back, come back and borrow again. And then you're like, yeah, right. Well, we know we've done a good job because you've come back and you've said, you know, let's go again.
It makes a lot of sense. So the third thing I wanted to talk about, lastly, is the book.
Yeah.
That's the other, I suppose, it's almost the other project that you've been involved in
Yep.
outside of some of the other more traumatic experiences. But this actually is really interesting because this looks back at your life and looks back at some of the experiences you've had.
Yeah.
So what made you want to write this book?
Yeah. So, I went to a part about 15 years ago. I got invited to a party from one of my clients where I was working at the time. And at that party, the host introduced me to a lady who worked at a publishing company, and she said, "Oh, you've got to tell her your story. I bet they want to write a book about you." And I got talking to this lady, and she was like, "Oh, yeah, we'd love to write. You know, we'd love to work with you and write a book." It's about 15 years ago, no, probably longer, probably 20 years ago. And at the time, I was like, "Oh, yeah, that sounds like a great idea," you know. And most of what had happened to me in my life had happened by then, but obviously, you know, I've had another 20 years since then. And I thought about it, and I just got too busy, and the idea just fizzled away. I ended up not doing anything about it. Then during COVID, I found out I had bladder cancer, and that was like the 5th time I'd had cancer. And actually, when I looked at the timing, it was like 39, nearly 40 years from my original diagnosis. And I thought, well, look, you know, we're working from home. I've got a bit of time. I've got a bit of money to invest in it. Why don't I revisit the idea of writing my story? Because, you know what, it's been 40 years now, and that, to me, that was sort of catchy. I can call it 40 years of overcoming cancer. Ended up being the title, 40 years of overcoming cancer. 39 years, 40 years, bit of poetic license there. So I literally went on to the internet. How do I go about writing a biography? And up popped, the first site that popped up was a company called Story Terrace. And Story Terrace, for a fee, set you up with a ghostwriter, and they basically do it all for you. It's all done online. The book's prepared online. You upload photographs you want to include, and they put you in touch with a distributor, and it's all done. You pay for the services, and I set that up. And I told them what I wanted to do, and they match you up with a writer, and they matched me up with a guy called Chris, who was a guy from Liverpool who'd written a book himself about having a poor heart condition, and Chris and I got on well. And what we would do was we would have these Zoom calls, because it was during COVID, so we couldn't meet anybody. And we would have these Zoom calls, and then I would be talking to him, and he was recording what I was saying what I'd done was I sort of kind of tried to chapterise my life roughly. And then I kind of tried to come up with some sort of headlines inside each of the chapters, and that just gave me points to talk about. And then what we did was, a couple of times a week, we'd do a chapter at a time, and I would just talk, and then Chris would type down what I'd said, and then he would email me that, and then I would read it, and then I would edit it.
How did it tend to come out? So when you did that, what did it feel like? Because
Well,
there's someone else interpreting what you're saying, but it's not you saying it.
Well, what I found was happening was when he emailed me the chapter, he'd written it how he spoke.
Yes.
So we had this conversation when you looked inside some of the book and what I've said to you about what some of my friends have said. So even though I'd said it, he'd written it as an author how he would talk. And I would read it in it, and I'm like, I wouldn't talk like that. So we agreed that I would track changes, so you could see where I'd made changes because it come out red on the Word document. And by the time I send his Word document back to him, it was like all red, And he was like, look, ultimately, I'm not taking offence to this because it's your book. You want to say it how you want to say it. And if I'm giving... And I couldn't have done it without him. Without him starting, I couldn't have put it on paper. But him having something on paper gave me something to work from. And then I just worded it the way I spoke. And, he would have a habit of using certain tenses that didn't feel right to me. He would keep referring to stuff in the present tense. when I'm talking about something from 25 years ago. And for me, it didn't feel right. It felt like I should be talking in the past tense. There's something from 25 years ago. So anyway, he was cool about it. And so he would send me, I would edit it, go backwards and forwards, backwards and forwards. He said he really enjoyed it. You know, he was convinced it would be a a bestseller, obviously. And it was, I don't know what the phrase is, cathartic, is it? I don't know.
Cathartic.
Cathartic,
Yeah.
yeah. It was a great feeling of, the emotions that I went through, reliving it all and going through the detail. I loved it. I loved writing it. But all the time I was conscious of including content that people wouldn't be interested in. Like, who cares if you walked down the shops and tripped over and put a hole in your knee? No one cares really. But so I was sort of kept a lot back. A lot of my friends, for example, when they read it, would say to me, "Oh, I thought you might have included that time we were in the multi-storey car park." And I went, I was like, I forgot about that. Like, on reflection, I'm a big fan of the band Madness, right? I've been to see Madness and the Specials, I like that ska music. And I've been to see those two bands 30, 40 times in 40 years. I mentioned it once in there, So I probably could have done it. I probably could have done it differently. But what I wanted to do was include a mix of what had happened to me medically, how it emotionally made me feel as I was experiencing it, but the lighter sides of everything. So there's lots of laughs in there. I've had people tell me they've read it and they've cried and they've laughed out loud, and literally laughed out loud. So I want that. I want people to know that I'm not. It's not a cry out for misery. I'm not. I don't want people to contact me and go, "Oh, you poor so and so that you went through all that." I want people to say, "Oh my God, you've had such a laugh," and it's almost like this horrible thing didn't happen, but actually because it did happen, my life actually ended up the way it did. And that I don't really think I'd change anything, because I think if it hadn't happened to me, most of what happened in my life might not have ever happened. As you said, I was due to be a car mechanic and I could have taken a completely different path in life. And so I obviously, you don't make a great deal of money selling books. I wasn't interested in making money out of it. So all the sales proceeds I just gave to cancer research, and still do really. There's still a few sales, a couple of years down the line. There's still a few sales dribbling through. I just donate that money. But more than anything, what I wanted was to hear as many stories as possible of people that actually did feel inspired by it. I want people to read it and go, "Oh, do you know what? I'm going to beat this thing that I'm dealing with, that I'm facing, and I'm going to move on, and I'm going to go on to achieve whatever I wanted to in my life, despite this disease. It's not going to beat me, That's what I want." And thankfully, I'm delighted to say, I've had a few examples of that where people have contacted me and said exactly that, and ultimately that's good enough for me.
What I love is, I love the front cover. We'll be able to get a shot of this, but it's a shot of you cycling in Cuba, right?
Yes, that's right.
And this gentleman here, he was with you.
Yeah, he basically helped me around the whole bike ride, and sort of, when I struggled on hills, the guy literally in that picture, he's literally pushing me up that hill. He's pushing, and I thought it was symbolic, I thought, there is a picture of someone helping me through life. You can see I've got an artificial leg on the left there.
Yes.
Yeah, if you look closely. And
this is hand on your back.
And his hand on my back is helping me, yeah. So he's sort of, I chose that picture because I just thought it was symbolic,
Yeah. No, I think what for me, I love about this picture is that it goes back to something that we spoke a bit about before, but it's particularly, I think, really important when we talk about our work with young people, is the relationship between us and people who support us, and us allowing people to support us, and to be vulnerable enough to say, I actually do need help.
Yeah.
Which is amazing. And so you've said that you've had some really positive experiences from people who have actually read the book.
Yeah.
And how it's had an impact on their lives.
Yeah, I have. Yeah, I literally just 2 or 3 weeks ago, I was at a horse racing meeting, and I got talking to the chap sat next to me at the table, and and I told him a little bit about me, and then he happened to mention to me that his friend was going through an experience of cancer of his own. So I said to him, well, look, just, with his permission, just give me his address and I'll post him a copy of the book. I'll just write him a little message in the cover. And I did. And then I got a really nice text message from the guy the day after. And he literally, he said, oh, I understand my friend bullied you into sending me a copy of your book, but I'm so glad you did. And, and this guy was going through his own battle, and I could see just from his message the similarities in our, he was looking for parallels in our life, and there were some, and hopefully he's using that, to help him get through his own challenge. All right, it might be different to mine. It doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be the same. It could be any one and any challenge in life, really. It's really just about having the belief that you can get through these difficult times in your life, especially now medical science is so much better than it ever was. Go through the process, go through the treatment, come out the other side and be stronger for it. And then go on, and then everything you achieve will mean so much more than before, because now you've done it by overcoming adversity.
A couple of last questions. Firstly, what's the best advice you've received in your life?
Oh, wow. Oh, that's a really good question. Trying to think about who it was who would have given me that. I mean, my last boss, or the guy who was the managing director at Octane, he must have given me some sound bites over the years that I worked with him. I'm just trying to think what he would have said.
We can come back to that if you want.
Yeah.
What's something that people might be surprised to know about you?
Well, as I said, there's not much hidden about me. I sort of, I'm very much out there. I share a lot about myself. So, I would say probably that. What would someone be surprised to know about me? Did you say? Probably that I cry a lot at films films that are even the slightest bit sad. I cry a lot. I've been on a plane with a load of workmates. I tell you what film it was as well. It was The Green Mile. I've seen it before. I know it's my favourite film. One of my favourite films. And I don't know if you've seen the film, but It's the bit where at the end when he's watching it'll make me cry. I start talking about it. But they've given him the chance to watch the film. I can't remember what film it was, but he's crying, and and he's scared of the dark. And I've seen it before. Made me cry. Watched it on a plane. All my mates around me, and I'm sitting there because it made me cry again. So that's probably the thing. My wife takes the mickey out of me for it. I cried at the opening scenes of Up. The cartoon
the opening
film.
scenes of Up.
The opening scenes before the film starts, where he builds up the story about meeting the girl and his wife, and she dies. I'm crying.
Yeah.
I'm crying. So that's probably if we're sharing, that's something I'm not ashamed to admit. I cry very easily at films.
And when we were talking about advice, so maybe a different way of phrasing it is, what advice would you give for any young person listening to this or watching this?
Well, I mean, look, from my perspective, I would say, first of all, always do not limit your goals. Yeah, don't think that something is just too far to reach, because it probably does lead on to some advice I got given about a phrase called chunking down of goals. And it might be that if you look at something that you want, that it looks too far away. Something that you want to achieve is just too far. It's out of reach. So what you have to do is chunk it down. Bring it back to today. So what steps do you need to take to get where you want to be? Okay, that final step's too far away at the moment in your own mind. So what about step one? Well, what does step one look like? Can I get there? Yeah, I could do that. What have I got to do? Great. Then step two, then step three. And if it's 5 steps, 6 steps, doesn't matter. If that thing that you really want is that far away that you can't see how to get there now, chunk it down. Look at the steps that you need to take, the milestones that you need to achieve to eventually get you there. But don't ever think too small. Don't. Sometimes it's a little bit crude to talk about money, and I won't. But sometimes when I've had a good month and I look, even now, I think to myself, how is this possible that I'm in this situation? And I go, well, do you know what? Look, I know what I'm talking about. I think I'm good at what I do. Maybe I do deserve it. Maybe I've been through enough and I do all the right things and I do deserve it. But sometimes I still, now, not so much when I was younger, but now I'm older, I do look and go, wow, how have I got here? But don't ever think something that you want to achieve is out of touch or too far away.
Oh, that's really good advice. Really good advice. So how can people find this book, 40 Years of Overcoming Cancer?
Oh, blimey, you can get it on Amazon now for about $1.99. I mean,
Nice.
Literally, you just type in on Amazon 40 Years of Overcoming Cancer, and I think if you're a Prime member on Amazon, you can get it the next day for like £2. I mean, It was 10 quid. It was 10 quid when I first sold it, but I don't know how the logarithms work. But obviously, as sales slow down, the price comes down. So now's a good time to get it for next to nothing.
And if someone wants to do up their house, or someone wants to buy another house, or find finance, how do they find you?
Yeah, well, look, if they want to understand a bit more about how Octane might be able to assist them, remember, primarily we're dealing with property investors rather than someone's own home. But just go onto our website, www.octanecapital.co.uk. I'm on there somewhere. If you look at the team, I'm one of the team members. I'm on there. Our contact details are on there. There's an inquiry option on there, and it tells you on our site about the ways in which we can help people. And you know what? If you are interested in doing something that we don't do, get in touch with me anyway, and I'll put you in touch with a broker that can help you, because the thing about the brokers is they've got the opportunity to look at the whole of the market, whether it's regulated or not. And so for all those areas where we can't assist, a broker will have access to someone that can.
Yeah, apparently you're the go-to person. Where other people can't help, you often can find a way.
I'll take that. Take that.
And one final question: what does the future hold for you? I suppose you and your family. Really.
Yeah. Well. I really, really hope that I could get a kidney. That's not a request, by the way. But hopefully, I come back from holiday in a couple of weeks' time. The tests that I've had done recently were okay, and they put me active on the list. And if I can get a kidney before Christmas, that would be fantastic. I actually got another holiday booked for next March, so I really want to get into hospital, get my kidney and get better so that I'm well enough to make this holiday. Because otherwise I'm going to have to cancel that holiday, and I'm really looking forward to it. I don't want to do that. So that's the immediate term. I'm still enjoying work. I'll carry on working as long as I'm well enough to keep working. And so obviously that is all linked to my health, really. So as long as that can. And because I love it. I love it so much that I'm not even working. I could retire on the pension I've got now. I just don't want to. So all the time I'm well enough to, I'm enjoying work that much that I will just carry on working until I'm not well enough to. And we'll hopefully. I'll be trying to work out how I'm going to get tickets for the Europa League final next year, when West Ham get to the final of that. Perhaps, don't know. Either I'll settle for having a half decent season.
Justin, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Thank you.